Many people regard you as a personification of Ubuntu. What do you understand Ubuntu to be?
In the old days when we were young, a traveler through a country would stop at a village and he didn't have to ask for food or for water. Once he stops, the people give him food, entertain him. That is one aspect of Ubuntu, but it will have various aspects. Ubuntu does not mean that people should not enrich themselves. The question, therefore, is, are you going to do so in order to enable the community around you to be able to improve? These are the important things in life. And if one can do that, you have done something very important which will be appreciated.
On the 21st of September 2019, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the Open Source Report. The title of our episode is China and Open Source. As we normally do, we look at the kernel. This is the basis, the Linux kernel, the basics of open source. The latest stable kernel is 5.3, and also is called the mainline kernel. Let me just get this up and I'll look at a few of these kernels here and where we are. The long-term kernel is 4.19.73. Our Slackware kernel, the latest updated kernel, is 4.19.74. That's the one we're using on our Slackware server. And on the Ubuntu server, I believe we are at 4.19.60, and that is where we are on Ubuntu. Those kernels are being constantly updated. Now, since we use a custom kernel out here, we'll go to, on our Slackware server, we will go to 5.3 very soon here, as soon as we have an opportunity to update it. Now, the idea for this program came actually a bit in past times. This is from Tech Republic by Matt Essay, wrote this article. It was back in August, on the 23rd of August, but nonetheless, it is not time sensitive. The title of the article is How China Became a Hero in Open Source. Now, China's 10th five-year plan made open source a priority, but Android made open source software a reality. And we'll be talking more about Android and where some of the one of the major Chinese smart set manufacturers is going, Huawei, and we'll talk about their latest phone. And according to this article, China was once a relative zero when it came to software. Not anymore. In both proprietary and open source development, China's influence is growing. Open source has helped to fuel that rise, as the CEO Simon Cosby of Swim.ai has suggested. Now China can download our best and for free every day, but this tells an incomplete story of China may have been a net consumer of code once upon a time, but not now, is what is coming out here. Getting serious about software, China was not always a paragon of open source virtue, and for that matter, the country didn't invent much software, period. As Dr. Yin Li, the Vice President of VMware in Greater China, has highlighted the 10-year plan there. That was from 2001-2015 5. That was the first 5-year plan of China has 5-year plans, and so it's the 10th plan there. Information is the key in promoting industrial advancement. We agree there. Industrialization and modernization, they go along. Therefore, national economic and social imposition should be the first priority. Putting an effort into promoting national economic and social information is a strategic action in the fulfillment of the whole modernization construction plan. Now, what we're talking about here is knowledge work, actually. Not only was this a matter of economic development, Casway stressed, but it is also a matter of national security. China has a very solid historical reason for avoiding dependency on foreign tech without some access. Yes, I say that means of production. So the former subjects of various Euro enterprises, but for China that issue is the core of the modern state. I recall at an Intel conference the CEO of Intel was talking about China, and China at the time was contemplating their own CPUs to counter Intel, and he basically said that was not such a good idea, that processors became nationalized. Well, we now know from Huawei that it is a good idea. China has a software industry roughly 2% the size, or had, of the U.S. That was in 1999, 20 years ago. And went into overdrive with their 5-year plan. China didn't actually anticipate open source until 2011 when Android hit. It's a little bit different there. I can recall downloading a Linux edition called Red Linux, and that was from China. It was the same basic type of operating system as a Slackware, any other operating system. The only difference was, or Red Hat for that matter, it was in Chinese, but you could operate it, and we did operate it. Open sourcing China, while perfect measures today, China's developers make up a third largest block of developers contributing to cloud native computing foundation projects like Kubernetes. We hear lots about Kubernetes these days, and the second largest group contributing to GitHub hosts repositories that is now owned by Microsoft. This is impressive, and it's a matter of self-interest, as even with open source. According to Claywell, this heavy involvement comes down to two reasons. First, order defensive for China's standpoint. Then it makes then about making sure that they integrate actively with the rest of the world's technical structure. Very, very important when you have an economy that is globalized. Liu agrees, but adds another reason: China's increased adherence to international norms of intellectual property, including open source norms that involve open access to code. Now, this is some of the issues brought up in the various machinations around Huawei. Open source, of course, can't be stolen, but just because it's freely available doesn't mean it's free. To benefit fully from open source, and developers and organizations that employ them do well to actively contribute to open source communities. As is noted in the stats earlier, Chinese developers have been increasingly active contributors. Professor Liu explains why the growing open source community in China has long-term benefits for our customers, as well as the technologies we are developing. When you have a community, you have more people to exchange ideas and more agility when it comes to problem solving. We want to provide, and this is what business people will tell you, value to the global community and our customers, and actively encourage our developers and engineers to contribute to open source communities. This would be the same situation that you would have with the Microsofts and various others, IBMs of the world that contribute. While the community ethos has been shrinking by presidential threats and tariffs, as so far Chinese developers retain an unimpeded access to key sources like GitHub and the Apache Foundation. We've been with the Apache Foundation, incidentally, at Cranston Software since its beginning, quite literally. We did object to the name and still do of Apache, but we'll work that out later. That's good because it turns out that we need Chinese developers giving and taking to and from open source, especially given the importance to charting open source's future in the cloud. And the cloud has been more and more of that, and we now see the importance of open source in the world of development. In previous episodes here on the Open Source Report, we've talked about open source in developing nations, including Kenya is becoming a source of tech development there in Nairobi. We have an IBM center there, the only one on the continent, except I believe there is one in South Africa. But again, this whole idea of incubation around a community of developers, and we look at the emerging nations in Africa and in Asia as a source of production because of the demographics of their populations, much younger people in those populations, and thus we'll have robust development to come, period. And we would let's go to some other things we have here, and we on open source as we make our way down the proverbial here. This is a live program. Now we'll go ZDNet here, working on the Linux nuts and bolts at the Linux Plumbers once a year, and this is the top Linux developers meet in at the Linux Plumbers and the Kernel Summit to hash out problems and concerns with Linux development. And here is what happens. Now, this is recent, the 12th of, more recent, I should say, the 12th of September. Linux is built on the Linux kernel mailing list and numerous other specialized development lists, but email and Ready Chat, as IRC, can only get so far. Sometimes you need to get it done. Top programmers really need to talk face to face, and that is the Linux Maintainers Summit and Plumbers. The Summit creator of Linus Torvalds told me it's an open invitation gathering of the top kernel developers, but while you might think it's about planning of the kernel's future, that's not the case. The Maintainers Summit is really different because it doesn't even talk about technical issues. It's all about process of creating and maintaining the Linux kernel. That's very interesting to Torvalds because, as he says, I spend most of my time on the process rather than the technical issues, but for most people that's not interesting, no doubt. For the true nuts and bolts of individual Linux subsystems, you need to turn to the Linux Plumbers. In the 90s and early 2000s, if a developer wanted to meet with his or her peers, there was no serious outlet. Conferences on and off were mixed with other broad conferences such as the Atlanta Linux Showcase, the Ottawa Linux Symposium, and Linux World. Developers knew this was a real problem, so James Bottomley, an IBM Research distinguished engineer and a top Linux kernel developer, explained, we forced our way into the open source development lab, board of directors in 2006, and listed demands for the kernel to make the organization more useful to the Linux kernel developers. One of our requests was that they assist us with a Linux-focused conference. Folded in with the free standard groups to form the Linux Foundation, the kernel development got their wish. Developers got their wish. The first Plumbers Conference was held in 2008 out in Portland, Oregon. Since then, conferences of a few hundred developers. The latest one was in Lisbon, Portugal. And it's been all about the plumbers. This is a conference for people who care about making schema deadlines safe for kernel K-threads and so forth and so on. Instead, it's a conference for people who know the dirty details about the particular Linux kernel subsystems in and out, and in short, is for plumbers. You always need plumbers out there hacking around. It's also not a story for people who want to learn, people who want to learn these subsystems, while developers who are well on their way into becoming kernel or subsystems experts can learn from discussion. This get-together is more of a professional peer-to-peer discussion. As Tobels points out, almost half of the people presenting at the plumbers were also speaking at the plumbers. Bottomly adds, the plumbers is development-centric. It's focused on learning the technical edge. And it has been many plumbers out there, and this is always true. There are no flop here. Presentations quickly morph into discussions between experts hashing out the need to be done with such issues as how to bring testing and continual integration into the kernel development process. This, according to Mr. Khan, a prominent Linux kernel developer, and he is a fellow at the Linux Foundation, observing it still needs lots of work. For NDN, the closing speaker was Thomas Glaxner, a leading real-time Linux developer. Plumbers bring people together so they hash out problems. And this is a story we don't have here now, but there is a Microsoft, evidently here, a Microsoft private Linux developer security list. That is kind of troubling in the sense that anything Microsoft is in is to be scrutinized, no doubt about that. That is just one of those situations that you have out here. Let me start the discussion off here. Some of the gadgetry, that is always an interesting way of going here. And let me just pause just a second here. WBIN Radio. Well, the first thing we have here is an open source Linux smartwatch. This is Pine64 drops its first look at this particular situation here. And let me get the old eyes out again. And see what they're up to. Nice picture there. Linux smartphones have hardly set the world on fire the last few years, unless you are Russian. Yes, we know Android is a Linux-based system, at least for now. But it hardly counts when Ubuntu can't make it work. Who can? Needlessly plucky little operations like Pine64 have been offering the prospects of Linux laptops for years, and now they plan to bring their own headsets too. It's a real interesting bit that Pine is working on its equivalent of Wear OS. The first fruits are being previewed in the form of a Linux smartwatch. Pine is always Pine time is always impossible to say in any voice, but Krupp and Kim is set to run an ARM embedded free RTOS, and is specifically designed as a companion to Linux smartphones. The big draw, however, is that Pine Time is set to cost just $25. That would be 20 pounds in big Boris bucks, making it easy to sell for those 5 people who want the phone. The prototype shown is it's unique in casting and stripe. Has been light of the day in other smartphones, but the software, that is all new, baby. You don't expect Huawei Watch 2 or TicWatch Pro. It's very much an entry-level affair. Expect a heart rate monitor, a Bluetooth, and not massive amounts else. But the fact that being open source is a damn fine tinker toy will make it a lot of developers and hobbyists Pine64, and we should have looked that up. I'm sorry, we'll get that in another open source report. described as a side project. Is not just it's not just got a release date as of yet, but it's only mentioned in passing on the company's Twitter page. We'll put that link up at the Cranston Twitter feed for them. Cross your fingers anyway. It can't be more worse than Wear OS. Well, no doubt about that. It is coming. That's a smart little phone there. Actually, it has the regular old-time hands to it. Looking at it here. And we'll put a picture of it up here, and so people can look at it. Now, let's move along here. And some review here. This is from IndieNet, Linux and open source. We did the Plumbers. That was by Stephen J. Vaughn Nichols, anyway. And again, another article by him. A new Apple iPhone. Please get the best, pay less with Android, is what he says. Yet includes iPhone 11. iPhone 11 and 10 are both running around here. They're not hot sellers, period. And some other headlines. Microsoft hosts first Windows subsystem for Linux conference. We'll come with that in a minute. That'll be next year in March of 22. And Dell has a new laptop out there. And so we'll get into some of this. We'll first get into Java. Now, for those people that use Linux, Java has always been one of those issues out there. The Ellipse Foundation has announced the release of Jacra EE8, the first truly open source vendor neutral version of Java Enterprise. Jakarta, let me change that. Anyway, Java being fully open sourced has been long time coming, while Sun has an open source of some Java as long ago as in November of 2006. We've used that. Actually, using Java in open source way was troublesome. Just ask Google about Android and Java, but Java in the enterprise thing has changed on the 10th of September. The Eclipse Foundation announced the full open source release of Jatar EE8, a full platform and web profile specifications, related technical compatibility. This comes after Oracle let go of most of enterprise Java, JEE, intellectual property. Oracle retains Java's trademark. We use that incidentally here at WBRN, the Boston Red Network. On Friday Java, it's spelled the same way. Anyway, could be the coffee. Java EE's naming convention has been changed to, instead of Java, Jactar EE. But for practical programming and production purposes, Jakarta is EE is the next generation of enterprise Java. If Java sounds familiar, that's because it is not the first time that the name has been used for Java EE services. From 1999 to 2011, Apache Software Foundation ran Apache Jakarta, which covered all of Apache's open source Java efforts. And I hope we'll see. Jatar EE specifications are fully compatible with Java EE8. This is Java EE8. I hope we mentioned that. The specifications for development under Jatar EE specifications and the Eclipse development process, which are open and community-driven, successor to the Java community process. That would be JCP. They have the 8 also includes the same APIs, and Java docs using the same programming model Java developers always used. So just we have Java 8 ticks out there, and that is vital. That's from Mark Little. He's at Red Hat. JBoss having Joctor 8 fully compatible with Java EE is likewise important, so with existing applications there. Now, many times in development issues, we had Java and how to use Java, particularly with Slackware, and if you go over to Alien Bob's site, you'll see the alternatives to Java there, and it'll be interesting to see how they are now using that. I've not put it up yet. We did, however, download it. Let me go to Dell Computer here, and let's see how the time is here. Now, Dell released the latest Linux developers laptop with a Comet Lake CPU. Now, Dell dedicated a laptop for open source programmers. New release out there for Dell. Now, we use AMD here at Cranston. Depends on how you want to do it, but we do put Linux on it, Slackware. Anyway, when it comes to Linux laptops for professionals, it's hard to beat Dell's XPS 13 Developers Edition, now with its latest Ubuntu-powered XPS 13 release. Dell continues to sell to set the standards for high-end programming laptops. The new laptops are built in the 10th generation core, that is iCore 121OU processor, that's Comet Lake. They will be arriving in September, and in October Dell will upgrade its laptop to the 6-core Intel Comet Lake processor. So it will have plenty of power. Incidentally, it's kind of interesting here. Many of the Linux developers and our Slackware developers use the Apple notebook, which sits on top of Unix. Anyway, for networking, the latest XPS 13S using the killer AX16P. That is an Intel Wi-Fi 6 chipset. You're seeing a lot of notebooks, including the one that we're using here, a lot of Broadcom chipsets there. When it comes up to 16 gigs of RAM, a fingerprint reader, a narrow beveled out there. Anyway, another nice upgrade to this system is a webcam has finally been moved to the top of the display. That's what's on this old notebook here. The new laptop model will run with Ubuntu, and actually this is what we use, 18.04. LTS, Ubuntu will be that support there for 20 years. So to get you up to April of 2028, that is where they are out there. And let's jump back here to Microsoft before we go to the tragic story of Richard Stallman. Microsoft will be hosting a community conference on Windows subsystem for Linux and related technologies. That'll be in March. Again, saying it loves Linux, I bet they do. Linux distribution for Windows 10 and Free Software Foundation founder spoke at Microsoft. This is Richard Stallman. So why have a Microsoft conference on the a Linux conference on the Microsoft campus? Well, Hayden Barnes, the founder of Whitewater Foundry, a startup focusing on a Windows subsystem for Linux, announced it. The first community conference of WSL. The event will be held on March 10th and 11th at Building 20. That's the headquarters in Redmond, Washington, outside of Seattle. The conference is, of course, still being put together, and we all know it will have presentations and workshops from Whitewater, Linux for Windows, etc., Canonical. That is Ubuntu. Ubuntu has being more of a open, private type of software. It has its advantages and it has its drawbacks. Because we've used Ubuntu before, and of course we use Ubuntu on this notebook. Ubuntu is still buggy in our opinion. It does have some features here that we like me, but the problem here is that some of the apps here, if you look at Slackware, you can't beat Slackware for the apps. And in fact, if you need any app that has a tarball, it will be compatible with Slackware. And we missed that, and we'll have to rectify that. We had a problem, and this is a problem with particularly the older notebooks, with the Wi-Fi component there, because a lot of these drivers are not open source. So that causes a problem out there to begin with, period. And I just looked at one of the little blob I should say. The Apple Watch Series 5 is $500, and the Primetime Linux smartwatch is $25. Well, a little different. Many people seem to doubt with Microsoft's serious commitment to Linux, considering this is one of the more proof points that it's time to rethink that situation. Microsoft does not have a serious connection to Linux in the philosophical. However, though, in the commercial sphere, the mercantile sphere, whatever you want to call it, they do, because they understand and recognize that the cloud is all about Linux, period. IBM understood that when they bought Red Hat. So if you're going to be in the cloud, where many of these enterprises and not so enterprise people are heading to, you're going to be Linux. And now that is the battle between the Red Hats of the world, the IBM and their strength out there. And then, of course, you have Amazon. And talked about Amazon here yet, but their Amazon Web Services, Linux there. You can have some Microsoft type products. But the whole situation is, why have Microsoft in the first place? Because you don't need them. If you use Libre Open Office, that will suffice, I should say, there. There are open source tools. We use them as good or better than Microsoft's products. The problem is the lingering effect of Microsoft in enterprise, because Microsoft used to basically sell OS. Well, if your boxes and machines, laptops to put Windows 10, Windows 11, or Windows whatever you want to call it on these days, and their competitor Apple has been offering their system for free. Microsoft did it for a while, went the other way, but there's still less and less of these devices out there. Now in enterprise, a little bit different there, and some enterprises are still running a Microsoft's Office suite. They're pushing it. They give it free to university students, hope you're getting them on it. But the problem is that more and more, much of the so-called clerical work is being done by email. And you can run email on Pine. That is an open source, old school type email reader and sender. We use it occasionally, still like it. Basically text based. But there are, as they say, better and inexpensive ways. And also the competitor Google Docs and Google academic situations, they go into universities. And the Google scholarly efforts there, the idea of having all these books, that's Google. In the mix, Google Docs, where university students use Google Docs for free. They use it in the enterprise set. You even have your Hangouts. It's still in the enterprise set, incidentally, with Google. But Google is not purely open sourced. That's one thing to remember, where Google is going to stand in this situation. There are businesses, obviously, that use Google Docs, etc., and Google's various other applications. But Google has stumbled. If you recall, a number of products Google has brought out. Google Glasses, we don't hear of them anymore. Maybe in the medical sphere, but they have faltered on that, and they are also in the self-driving car business as Waymo. Waymo is doing better, but the whole idea around this Android Apple system, it is to go away. And so with the Linux kernel, at least that's how it's planned, they'll turn that to Fuchsia, which is a Japanese flower, and have a new operating system, sort of like what Huawei is doing. Huawei is doing basically the same thing. Let's go to the story of Richard Stallman. For those that have not heard, Richard Stallman was the chair of known as RMS of the Free Software Foundation. He invented the Emacs text editor, for those that like it, and the GCC family of compilers. His work on the GNU, that's a public license, defined what free software means, and we award him for that. He was also a MacArthur Genius Award. Most recently became known as being a crank who insisted that Linux should be known as GNU Linux, and alienated many of his supporters there. But what did him in was his support for Marvin Minsky and AL Pioneer, and he was an associate of the notorious Jeffrey Jeffrey Epstein of artificial intelligence. Anyway, Mr. Stallman has resigned as the president and a board member of the Free Software Foundation. In a brief statement, the founder, Stallman, in 1985, to further the cause of software freedom, announced the board will be conducting a search for a new president beginning immediately. Stallman also stated on his own blog that he was resigning from MIT. I'm resigning effectively immediately from my position at CSAIL at MIT. I'm doing it due to pressure on MIT and me over a series of misunderstandings and mischaracterizations. His sudden departure comes after the scandal erupted over the defense of Minsky, and also the head at MIT, a graduate there, Gino, graduate in engineer, leaked a message posted by Stallman on MIT's Computer Service Artificial Intelligence Lab list server. In these messages, Stallman defended Minsky because the assault accusation against Minsky had been inflated, and the most plausible scenario is that she presented herself to him as entirely willing, and she had concealed she had been coerced by Epstein. Stallman went on to write that because the accusations inflations, that is absolutely wrong to use the term sexual assault in the accusation. As statutory rape, Stallman said it's morally absurd to define rape in a way that depends on the minor's details, such as which country it was in, or which victim, or whether the victim was 18 or 17. He's absolutely wrong on that. This is where it may be morally absurd, but legally it is correct. Period. And related to the scandal, the former director of the MIT Media Lab, Mr. Ito resigned a month earlier after investigation revealed that his cozy relation there. I won't go into all that. And more of this story. There was more what we'll call office politics involved here. But they are not the only evaluating, but funding and endorsing a person like Stallman as a visiting scientist. Therefore, MIT should remove men like Stallman there. And this is what Gino had to say, claimed that never wanted to elevate Epstein's reputation. Anyway, she's not the only one who wanted to see Stallman out of public eye. Matthew Grant, the former Free Software Foundation board member, has tweeted, "Free software is an amazing thing. RMS is a liability." Garrett suggests maybe the best thing the Free Software Foundation that could do right now would be to hold some sort of constitutional convention on the future of free software, make it as accessible as possible, listen to what people want and what and act as facilitators in making it happen. And don't invite Stallman. In a blog post, Garrett suggested that Stallman is driving away natural airlines. This in itself, from at this mic, is absurd. It's inappropriate for him to continue as a figurehead while he's not there. He should be replaced per se. Instead, the free software should foster an environment where any member of the community can feel empowered to speak about the importance of free software. Well, we would agree on this, but what we would not agree on, if the implication is here, that free software would turn into something like what the Linux Foundation has, and that is more of a corporate promotion of the Linux kernel, because the people that work on the kernel directly are employed by the Red Hats of the world and otherwise, which does influence some things. You bring the dirty money along and you have that problem. And Richard Stallman, to his credit, has kept that out of the Free Software Foundation. And the free software will continue on with or without Richard Stallman, but he does have a part to play, as what happened with Linux Torvalds, the Dirty Mouth Torvalds, when he went to his seminars on anger management. Well, there are sometimes many people that will appear to be flawed can still do good works. And of course, Linus is back in the driver's seat, so to speak, and we see him again. So that happens. Let's see, we can hear from. This is in the Wire magazine here, Wired, on Richard Stallman and the fall of a clueless nerd. Is there the controversial pioneer of the Free Software Foundation resigned from MIT over his remarks on basically Marvin Minsky and Epstein won't be the last. A few days ago, I got this tweet directed to me. If I found a copy of the blue-curbed version of Hackers, could I get you to autograph it again? The one I currently have was signed by you and Richard Stallman at Linux World 1999. I'm afraid I'm going to have to burn it or shred it. That's silly. It required some decoding. 30 years ago, I wrote a book called Hackers, and this. Let me just introduce this properly here. I'm trying to find the name of the author here. Where is it? Well, I guess we'll get to it in a minute. Anyway, he said like the last people, the sole member of this indigenous tribe, Stallman, aka RSM, his email handle, later achieved fame in the digital realm as a champion of free software. Last week, Stallman, who had in the past written for Wire, pinned some comments related to Epstein. Anyway, we won't go into those again. He resigned. This is RSM from MIT and the Free Software Foundation he founded. And for those who have followed the free software movement, leaving MIT is like a big dome on Mass Avenue itself getting an eviction. The movement goes beyond Stallman, a McCarthy genius, a grant recipient, author of key pieces of open source software. No doubt about that. We recounted that in the last article. MIT itself is melting down because of old Epstein. The MIT Media Lab there, and calling for the ouster of MIT's president, who apparently okayed the payments. This involves not Stallman, but Ito. But Stallman's affair touched on something else, a simmering resentment about the treatment of women by the Brinks who built our digital world, as well as various others in academic and business who benefited from the hackers' efforts. Stallman put himself on a path of that outrage by contributing. This was the MIT's mailing list. We'll not go over this again. MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, in a deposition, one of Epstein's victims said she was instructed to have sex with this Minsky character. Of course, Stallman's reaction was that anyone who knew him would not be surprised. Instead of considering the pain of a young person, treated in such a manner. He nitpicked about whether such a case would be a proper instance of sexual assault. Well, that is a legal issue there. Email Fred, that's another classic Stallman. He wanted to read the actual deposition, but it's only available in Google Docs. Stallman boycotts all commercial software and had to ask someone to send it to him. Stallman showed the same blindness on more than 10 years ago with an idiotic comment on pedophile. I won't even go into that. Stallman's fumbles are legendary in computer science. People never met him know about his quirks. He likes to stay with hosts rather than in hotels. Anyway, it made Rolling Stone look easy to please the Rolling Stones. Anyway, he specifies example that he likes parrots and would like to interact with a friendly parrot. Well, very few people have parakeets. I think I told that story on Friday Java about the parakeets there. He once invited a friend to a lunch at a fancy restaurant, and she accepted on the condition that he comb his hair and wear a suitable attire. After a pleasant meal, he asked if she minded if he danced. He's a folk dancer evidently, and he danced. Oh well. So, the most obviousness probably leads to jokes and bad taste on email lists, and a scroll name card on his door at MIT, where he was until yesterday a visiting professor. Richard Stallman, it reads in black Sharpie, Knight for Justice. Also hot ladies. Oh well. He won't be seeing very more hot ladies there. The name card is an image of the recent Medium posts, and we'll have to get that in the future by an alum there, Gino, in which she demanded that he be tossed off the campus. Her essay is an example of the rising voice of women at MIT in the post-Epstein era. Well, Epstein was there because he could get the money. That's basically the only reason here. Let me finish this up. Stallman keeps a running log of political notes, things that catch his interest, where he posts a link and often comments. Anyway, won't get into the pedophile thing. Kookia. There are tragic threads in Stallman's story. His inability to understand that the hurt that comes from insensitivity leads to his expulsion from the world he knew and loved. I worry that what's next happened next for him, but the greatest tragedy is how long it took for such behavior to become disqualifying. Well, Stallman is not the only one, as we said earlier there. Linus Torvalds, and there's hundreds of those people around. And they make comments, and many times they're not brought out. Stallman is now more alone than I found him 35 years ago, but do not call him the last of his kind. More will fall as the reckoning comes. No doubt about that, but what Richard Stallman could do, I would suggest to Mr. Stallman, is stay involved in open source, stay out there as an advocate, and move on. Well, he obviously has moved on. But the problem is he's in his mid-60s now. He can continue and he can be of service to the liberty of free software world. A little bit of editorial here, and I'll get his little statement here. He just basically, Free Software Foundation, on the 16th of September 2019, Richard M. Stallman, founder and president of the Free Software Foundation, resigned as president, and from its board, the board will conduct a search, period. And let me see if we have anything else here. I think we have something on Chromebooks. We'll just bring this out. This is by Von Nichols here. Under his ZDNet situation here. When one of my compadres recently wrote that a Best Buy salesperson assured him Windows laptops were better than Chromebooks, I'm reminded of the old joke, what's the difference between a computer salesman and a used car salesman? The used car salesman knows when he's lying. Now there are Best Buy people who know their stuff, and there are Windows people who should stick with Windows. Best Buy should be happy to sell you a top-of-the-line Alienware gaming PC. But there are good reasons to use Chromebooks. Chromebooks, especially lately, have been prone to update problems after another, but the latest Microsoft broke virtual basic programs for many users. Oh boy. I mean, do you break virtual basic 6 code? The language has been a part and parcel of the family since 1988. We remember that. I have something around here someplace. Anyway, today Windows users hold off for as long as possible before updating their PC. Chrome users, on the other hand, have their systems updated every 6 weeks. Chrome OS is more secure than Windows, no doubt about that. Chrome OS has had security holes that they can deal with. But our take on that is, why use Chrome OS when you can use Linux? Period. If you're jumping from Windows 10 to Windows 10, there's no easy way to do it. If you have a Microsoft account rather than a local one, you can manually move your local files from third-party programs as Photoshop. Chrome OS, so you log into your new Chromebook and you're back in business. That in itself is a little bit scary. Say you drop your laptop, then the screen cracks. If you're running Windows, you'd better hope you have a recent backup. You're unable to restore it to a new one. Much too late. Good luck with that. Now I did that with a Chromebook. I got my new machine signed in, and in 3 minutes I was ready to go. Well, it's sort of like Citric or something like that desktop out there. But I would add there, if there is a problem with that, so we'll look at it, period. And the article we don't have here, but Microsoft Windows is falling apart, so says Bill Nye, the science guy, and Google. Anyway, the Chromebooks will be Linux desktop going forward. So that is something we'll have on our next report, talk about Chromebooks and Linux coming up there. Chromebooks run far more than just Chrome OS. I think we have that. Dropped its efforts to dual boot Windows and Chrome, also known as Project Campfire. It went out, but it still runs Android applications and Linux programs on modern Chromebooks. Thanks to crossover Chrome OS, you can run some Windows programs on it. Chrome vital laptops around these days. Chromebooks for everyone. Chromebooks for Windows. Mac OS machines are still the best, according to him. But if you want a laptop that doesn't have the bread and butter internet office work, get a Chromebook. But does have, okay. If you flexible system, Android, Linux, the web, and a bit of Windows, get a Chromebook. You're glad you did. In other words, you can run Linux on it. It is an all-in-one book. Anyway, this will do it for us. This is M.A. at Cranston Software. We've been doing this program now for many years, and we will obviously continue on. I don't know if we have the latest how we out here looked at them somewhere here. We had that particular version here, and I guess we don't. I guess to say we thought we did and we don't. But nonetheless, Howie has a new operating system out for its smartphones, and I'm not sure we'll get this up here or not. Possibly was from the BBC on their newest implementation, and how this is their notebook, their smartphone that is out here, and we may not have it, unfortunately. But we did. When you're working with many websites here, well, I guess we don't. We did. Possibly it was at CNBC. I'm not sure about. We'll see. Very quick. Yes, we won. No, Howie. Oh well. Anyway, the situation is they are now moving their own apps, and they're not using Android on their new phones, and maybe this is it. It's not. anyway, they are not using, and this is one of the things that's happened in the Huawei lawsuit, that the use of a Google PlayStation is no longer there, and the Google apps are not there. There is a workaround there, and I guess we'll have to put it in the next report out here, and for whatever reason, and we're not sure whatever reason that is. Now, we'll close out with this. I thought we were going to close out here, but nonetheless, alternative to free 65 Office, Libra Office on your next suite. Libra is out there. We use Libra Office, LibreOffice, LibreOffice. It's free. LibreOffice 6.3, that's the one we use. You can use it in 2019. As Office 2010 expires, Microsoft wants you to switch to Office 365, something you'll be paying for like a mortgage the rest of your life. Underline this policy by dropping Office 2019 from its home user program. That's assurance, software assurance business customers. The crew will, however, still be happy to sell you a discounted Office 365. So evidently there was still an Office 2019, the last resort. Microsoft really wants to switch you to Office as last resort. Microsoft Word, not mine. Microsoft recommends Office 2019. So I guess there is an Office 2019, and the prices went up on it. I would suggest if you're in the Office game, you get 2019. Well, you still can. There will be no Office 2020. There could be a simple reason: there is more money to be made in the other Office. Anyway, we'll leave it. We'll leave it as we are. VMware's Pivotal acquires show Cloud Foundry strength. Well, anyway, we'll see that. And other platforms as a service were on their way out. VM purchased Pivotal, and it shows that it's old to the dance of the software here. So this is here. Pivotal was in trouble in its first quarter. VMware, which spin Pivotal out in the first place. So anyway, platforms as service, Cloud Foundry, Pivotal is back. Cloud Foundry itself faces headwinds. Recently, it was thought that it would be replaced by Kubernetes-based hypercloud approach. Since then, Cloud Foundry embraced Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is very much out there. We'll talk more about Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry is enabling Java, Ruby, Node.js, .NET, PHP, Python, something is there, .NET Core, something is there for everyone, period. So Cloud Foundry is still around there. Within Cloud Foundry, you're running, say, on a private OpenStack cloud, so you can still be on Cloud Foundry. We had to add that to the mix. Anyway, this will finally do it for us. Good day, and we invite you, you can find us incidentally on Google Podcasts, on Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, and you can also find us on iHeartRadio. We recommend that. Wherever you are in the world, you can find us and tie in all of our programs on the Boston Red Network, WBRN Radio. They are all there. Whereas Boston Red, the political program, the Numbers Man Show, our macroeconomics program, that'll be coming out this weekend also. And All About Sports is a new program. It comes out periodically. BR on the World, that's our international program. And we've incidentally been covering the cloud action. And one other thing I want to throw in here. The Google workers for Amazon workers for climate change, they went on strike on a Friday, walked out of Amazon's place. Amazon's Jeff Bezos came out with a plan to make Amazon carbon neutral by 2040. That's ahead of the 2050 deadline, and they will go into electrical delivery trucks, etc. And there are data centers, and you can find more about that on The Week with Woz. That is on the Boston Red Network. Good day.